Hi, friends. Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Clouds Edge to Edge Transformation. And speaking of transformation, a lot of us came from different backgrounds, different parts of the world, and converged on creating value in this whole ecosystem that's changing the world of technology. And I got to know Corey Frazier during my Intel days, but I found out his history more recently. Corey, tell us about it. You're not the typical electrical engineer who went to build chips, right? How did you end up
Yeah,
working and how did you become the Corey you are today?
yeah. And thank you very much for this opportunity to chat with everybody. My first love was space and aerospace and airplanes and everything from the 80s. NASA, of course, was big in the 80s, all that good stuff. And so I kind of went that direction. And my dad used to always tell me things about the SR-71 Blackbird. I was a military brat. We were stationed overseas in one of the staging areas of the SR-71. And he would tell me it's classified. And I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. So I became an aerospace engineer. I always wanted to work on the space shuttle. I used to be around the Space Shuttle at the Eastern Missile Range at Patrick Air Force Base. So he would take me to see launches. In case you're curious, that poster I'm pointing at right now, that poster I've had since I was like 3 years old. I did aerospace, and then I decided, okay, I want to work on the Space Shuttle. Tried and successfully got to do that, and was working on it for 7 years. During that time, I was working on my master's via distance. I went to the University of Central Florida, and so I did that via distance, that master's degree, and that master's was in mechanical engineering. And then I went from mechanical engineering to my PhD in mechanical because my advisor from the University of Central Florida went to Texas A&M. And so I started doing this 2-hour drive one way from Southeast Houston to Texas A&M to work on my doctorate. And then the space shuttle program in 2010, George Bush said, hey, we should work on constellation program. And we were like, okay, cool. Some of us still have jobs. And then Obama came in and said, hey, NASA, think bigger. Let's try to transition this low Earth orbit stuff to private companies like SpaceX. Intel, fortunately, called, and so I joined Intel. A couple stints I've had here, or a few stints I've had, quality and reliability. So helping our engineers be able to properly qualify our products, make sure they're reliable before we release them, owning the process around that. Then after that, I became a design integrator, a person who led a team of people doing design work for the Aurora supercomputer, which is awesome. And then I did a couple of stints in engineering management, spent a little bit of time, a couple of 6-month bursts in Intel Capital to learn more of the venture capital side and entrepreneurship. And then I have this job where what I do is I use Intel's technology and resources and expertise to empower communities and help people with Intel technology as the focal point, and then showing that tech for good is also good for business.
Remember the good old days of flight simulators? The Blue Angels days, I've seen the 4th of July,
Yeah.
but they're no longer just simulators. Now you've got digital twins. How did the world change from just flight simulators into digital twins?
I've had the opportunity to touch on digital twinning a little bit in my career, and of course, the flight simulator aspects from the aerospace background. Before, you had either something that was like a video game, like a Microsoft Flight Simulator, and you were practicing that way. The more sophisticated VR setups, someone like an actual aerospace company or maybe the military, where you can sit in like a simulated cockpit kind of setup. But with digital twinning, you can create that environment. You also have the ability to look at it and mess around with the environment, right? Change and modify things. So if you're not just doing actual flight simulation, but you're looking at how do you improve avionics or changing the cockpit or some sort of configuration change, that's the value of digital twinning. You could take the same thing, recreate it in a virtual space, and then make modifications, maybe from an engineering standpoint or some kind of CAD design, some way of testing and driving actual improvements and seeing what will happen. You can recreate a virtual flight simulation with a digital twinned but modified cockpit, for example, or something of that nature. You can do things virtually to see what would. So that's really cool.
And speaking of flight simulation, you flew from one place to another between your bachelor's, master's, and PhD. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So the bachelor's, I think, happened the way a lot of people's bachelor's degree happened. I went to the school and got the degree and graduated. The real story probably happens after I got that degree. I decided I was going to be a master's student pursuing mechanical engineering, but focused on biomedical engineering. I had a professor who
Wow.
was using my aerospace background to look at lung bronchi and help develop more effective artificial lungs based on aerospace principles. That advisor wound up going to the National Science Foundation, kind of in the middle of my pre-period before you go into the the graduate program. And my mom had been telling me, you should apply for jobs. You should apply for jobs. And I was like, but mom, I'm just going to be a broke grad student and I'm going to come out making more money after 2 years. Again, Space Shuttle was there. And so I applied to a company that's called United Space Alliance. They were the prime contractor to the Space Shuttle. Boeing and Lockheed had a baby, and it was United Space Alliance. Worked on my master's. I went back to my original, aerospace focus, but still a mechanical engineering degree. It was shock tube studies, but it was heat transfer, shock waves, and really how does that factor into chemical combustion and what the chemical compounds that come out of it. That stuff is used in fuel research, fuel improvements. So shock tubes are kind of in that space. I did that for a little over 2 years via distance while working full time in the space program. And then took a year off, did some research, but wasn't in school. And my advisor from the University of Central Florida, who I worked with for my master's and for my undergraduate work, he said, hey, I'm going to Texas A&M. Would you like to work on your Ph.D? That began the journey of driving 2 hours one way from Southeast Houston all the way up to College Station and attending Texas A&M and getting my degree there. So that was an experience, working full time, driving 2 hours one way. And I'm glad I did it. I'm always a big proponent of going to school and working at the same time, knocking it out while you have the energy and the juice to go do so. There's definitely a lot of lessons learned.
Hats off to you and go Aggies.
There
You
you
must
go.
have seen a lot of Texas in the process.
It was a really great drive. It enabled me to listen to a lot of audiobooks and do a lot of self-learning. I got 2 hours, actually 4 hours, because 2 hours back home. So it was a great opportunity.
You worked in so many different spaces. You have studied and worked in space related activities, aerodynamics. You worked in biomedical instrumentation. You've also worked in supercomputers. You also worked on empowering people. Now you are working on that. What did you enjoy the most? There was no financial restriction. What would you do? What would your day look like?
That's a really good question. It's probably a combination of all of them. If I had no financial constraints, I would probably run some kind of foundation where we were inventing really cool new that helped people. Something like Knight Rider had a foundation that the car came from, and they were doing all these cool things. Maybe there's some investments that take care of everything so you can continue to do the work you do. But it'd be something like that, something along helping people, driving really cool technologies. It would probably be something like that. So I can't pick which one of them because when it comes to helping people, right, and the segment outreach and using technology to help communities of people, I like the outcome, the fact that it does something tangible that works. We can always talk about speed and feeds, as they say, the technology and the gee whiz factor of all the things we do. But at the end of the day, what impact does it have? That's what's sexy to me. That's what matters, is I like talking about how is this going to work, who's going to use it, who's going to be improved, how is humankind going to progress. But I also like technology. And even though I'm in a role where I am managing technology outreach and trying to impact communities, there's a part of me that still says, hey, Corey, you should be technical. You've got a PhD in rocket surgery.
So you want to be in a parallel universe where you are building rockets and fixing rockets and are helping people at the same time. That's
Yeah,
fantastic. I'm grateful that Intel has given you that opportunity to work with people and be technical at the same time. Speaking of which, what are the challenges and complexities of what you're doing now, and how did you transition into this role over a period of time?
I'll start with the second part of the question. How did I transition in? It's a collection of things. When they talk about your career, you don't just take jobs. For a few of the things I've been doing in my career is there's the obvious technical path, all the different things, the shuttle, the supercomputer, yada, yada, yada. But there's always been this thing on the side that's been going in parallel, sometimes within Intel, sometimes outside of Intel. And that's the community side of things. How am I able to impact communities of people with technology, with STEM, STEAM, with knowledge, with mentorship, with actual resources, with connections and networking to other things. And so when this job became available and it was crafted to be something that would drive outreach, so I was able to take the job. I was able to go from the job that I was in at the time. I had a brief stint in our Internet of Things group. And I said, wow, working with Intel Capital, outreach to communities. At the time, there was a gaming component that was really specifically identified too. And I was a lapsed gamer who was getting back into gaming. So there was that aspect. And I tried to be a creative person. So there was that aspect as well. And so I was like, wow, okay, this could be a job where I do what I would like to do as a harmonized Corey, right? All the Corys together, instead of there being a corporate Corey, a community Corey, a gaming Corey, a creative Corey, all these Corys are one person and you get paid to do it and that's how I made that transition. I interviewed, and of course, it was me on a piece of paper. So I felt like I was like, hey, this is me. Like seriously, hire me for this job. The other part of your question, though, we talk about how great this work is, and it sounds awesome when you put it on a piece of paper, you make a video about it or something else, right? Or I'm talking about the purpose and I got a job. It sounds great, but there are challenges, there are issues, there are basements to the balcony. One of those things is that often when we do tech for good, it's not well aligned to the business. It's hey, do this thing out of the kindness of your heart, and that's it. And don't get me wrong, that's great. But at the same time, if you want to have longevity in this kind of work, you have to do tech for good out of the kindness of your heart and make it so that your heart can still keep beating over here on the business side. And so one of the challenges is often making sure that our tech for good work has a business opportunity or a business outcome or a business objective that it supports. And that doesn't necessarily mean I have to be selling units or driving some kind of big purchasing or nothing like that with tech for good. But what it means is that there has to be something meaningful and tangible to the business. So it could be increasing mind share within communities that may not already have a good brand recognition or brand sentiment towards Intel, or maybe are not just really familiar with Intel or that kind of thing. It could be make sure people understand that Intel's products and technologies can help people. It's not driving necessarily a sales thing. It's more about the impact of what we do and what we make and why that is so valuable and critical to enabling everybody on Earth to be able to compute and participate in it. Just using Intel's technology and expertise to help people understand how to better go about something. So a great example is we set up an esports league in East Metro Portland. Having that model, we can articulate in like a white paper or in our posts or other media how to go about doing it so other schools in the Portland area can go ahead and start their own esports leagues, tie it to education. So that's one of the challenges, the business to altruism aspect. Another challenge is that the tech industry has had a big crunch, over the past couple of years. And so things like funding and resources become light. People transition, move, things like that. And a lot of the work that you do in this job is very connection, network, relationship based. So if you're making the right connections, you're building the right network of people who are going to help you drive these opportunities to do good things. But organizations change and objectives change and people transition and funding dries up here or there. Those are things you have to negotiate and you start being very creative with. Like, how are you finding new ways elsewhere within the company for little to no dollars to go still have an impact and still go help people, but without it costing something like on the actual budget dotted line. You want to make sure that you're finding all these new opportunities and new innovations. So that's one of the challenges, is coming up with new ways all the time, right, to be able to facilitate doing tech for good or for helping people. I would say the last thing I think is kind of a challenge. When you're doing this work, you have to make sure people understand what you're doing and the impact that it's having. And so in this role, you can sometimes play the role of the strategist, the tactical guy, the media amplifier, all these different things, treat it like it's foundation or something where you're going about the business and you make sure that you're not only doing the work, thinking about the work, strategizing it, doing it, and then you still got to socialize it and make sure that it is getting out there, that it's showing value. So there are a couple of other things I think on the side of working with organizations, being able to find the right mix of what they need to make sure that Intel can provide that. That's also got some challenges.
I find it really amazing that you're getting a chance to do the things that you probably dreamt about. I have a question about the semiconductor industry. It's widely believed that we're not just making chips anymore. Intel started off as intelligent electronics, same way Apple started off as a PC company, or Google started off as a search engine company. And today, everybody's making chips and systems and cybersecurity products. What's going on here? How is it that there is a confluence of these technologies and everybody seems to be doing everything?
Just speaking on my perspective on things, computing has become more and more ubiquitous. It's not just a PC, it's not just a chip per se. A chip is the component, but it's not just that. It's not just a server. Everything is now parts of everything else. You have your phone, which is this thing that has almost every function we had in the early 2000s, where you had multiple devices to do just what your phone does. So the ubiquity, I think, of compute is why everybody is starting to become everything else. Apple, for example, may say, hey, we want to create a whole ecosystem that does these things. Intel will say, hey, we have the chips that can power all of these. So we need to be concerned about the ubiquity of where it goes. For example, we look at mobile in terms of like your laptop and your mobility and where you're going and different devices that need to be able to pick up and move. We, of course, look at your PC and your workstations for higher power, higher performance kind of things. But then we also start looking at edge devices, things that you need to do your computing at the edge for something that may be transmitting large amounts of data across some vast distance, but you need to do the computing right there. So we're looking at all these different solutions for how to provide things to people that give them the ability, the functionality, the different experiences. And that's the thing. Everybody wants these different experiences that involve computing as the background, whether you realize it or when you use your watch to do something, that the autonomous vehicle, the smart city application, where in the future, I'm speaking a bit futuristically now, but buildings can, your car can communicate with the building to know like where it's at or what building it's just passing, or to make an order, whatever it is that those smart connections are going to do. And Intel tries to be the backbone of all these different technologies. So I think that's why you see everyone kind of starting to put, in the case of Intel, maybe not developing all the technologies, but we're developing the chips or the computing power for all these different applications, because we're seeing how ubiquitous computing has become. It is in everything. At some point, of course, it's going to be possibly in our clothes. It's already in our homes. A very smart application. I mean, like in some of the materials, like the walls or the flooring or something of that nature. That's why you see everybody transitioning to broader and broader segments, or even ecosystems of products.
Yeah, we moved from the economy to the siliconomy everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's a joy talking to you about these things. I'm sure because you're talking to young people in the community, you get asked this question all the time: where do I start my career?
Yeah.
Because it's confusing. And no career seems to be stable in the old definition of stability, which is you
Yeah.
keep doing the same thing for 10 years at a time. How should people approach their careers, whether it's at the starting point or say
Yeah.
in mid career?
The first thing I say overall is allow your career to change and adapt. It is rare that anyone has a career where they start doing this thing and they're, by the time they retire or they decide to stop working or whatever the case may be, they were doing that same thing. It is very rare in 2023 for that to be happening. It was probably rare in 2013 for it to be happening. This is something I'm starting to learn, being I'm not sure if mid-career, as a person with 20 years of experience now, I'm learning very deeply about what it means to chase your passions. When I started working, the Space Shuttle was my passion. I wanted to do it. And now I find myself realizing that there are other things I want to do, have, do, and be. And so definitely orient yourself towards your passions. You will enjoy what you do a lot more if you find out what you're passionate about and you pursue things in that space. That is the first and foremost thing. Some people are able to approach it where maybe they aren't necessarily doing what they're passionate about. They're able to do something that just maybe brings them title or accolades. I tried doing that personally, and it didn't get me where I wanted, and I wasn't very satisfied. So don't pursue that. That's my advice. If you are able to do that and that fits your theme for your career and it works for you, that's great. Go for it and be fantastic. If you're starting out in your career, first thing I would say is learn what you like and learn what you don't. Doing internships, doing odd jobs where you can get that kind of exposure. One thing we didn't have growing up, YouTube and all kinds of other content creation, you get to learn a lot about jobs and what it means to be employed in a role and what to do. Long before you had to do content creation, is kind of taking a lot of mystery out of things. Like you don't have to imagine a lot of things anymore. You can just experience it through someone else's. So I would definitely do a lot of research in that space. And again, if you have opportunities to go work in those spaces, whether it's because you were able to do a high school internship, college, or whatever the case may be, go be in those spaces. If whatever it is you are trying to do is something you can pick up and do, for example, using content creation, if that is something you want to do, you can do that right now and get experience. Do it while you're young. Learn the ins and outs, learn the parts about it that you don't like, learn the parts about it that you do love. If there's something you can pick up and do right now, pick up and do it. Start dabbling in it right now. I'm gonna skip to mid-career because that's where I probably self-identify more. If you are in your mid-career, a lot of people in mid-career start having doubts and concerns about their career, what energy they've put into it and where are they going to go, or the time they feel they don't have enough time. And that's one of the things I encounter all the time, that feeling. And I would tell folks, first off, if you have gotten to a point in your career where you've done well and you're starting to question your career, take a step back and say, hey, what is it that I really want to do? I'm using myself as an example. Back during the pandemic, I stopped and I said, okay, I'm doing all these things. I want to pursue these titles. I want to pursue these goals, but what do I ultimately want to do? And the thesis I have for the rest of my life, I want to spend the rest of my life creating. I got away from creating for about 10 plus years. I got away from taking the things in my head, the things that God put in my head to go do, and putting them out into the world, whether they're on paper or building an organization or whatever it is I was doing. And I stopped doing that. And so for me, my theme for the rest of my career was I'm going to create and build things. I'm going to leave the mark, and that's what I'm going to do. And so if you're in the middle of your career, I want to be sure that you are thinking about what it is you want to do with the rest of your life. Discover what that is, whatever it is for you, and then make a career decision based on that. This is obviously come from a place of privilege. If you have to continue to work a certain job because you have to feed your family and all these things like that, you got to do what you got to do for your career. But in the case of anyone who has the flexibility and ability to think about their career and make a shift if that's what they're feeling, I would encourage you to take a step back and decide what it is you want to do with the rest of your life in your career. What do you want to have been the meaningful thing you did? If it doesn't feel like it's going to the office to support these business goals and these business objectives, whatever the case may be, and it's something else, make space for something else. And that even includes if you have to use your job to subsidize the thing you want to go, that is okay. You don't have to necessarily up and quit and go do whatever, go travel the country on backpack or whatever it is that you thought you were going to go do. Start to trend yourself in that direction. Also, and this is something I did with my job, make your day job as best you can be aligned with what it is you want to do in your career. So for me, I wanted to create, I wanted to build things, I wanted to be impactful, all these things like that. Well, make sure you're taking your day job and you're doing things in your day job that are bringing you closer and closer and closer to that as much as you can, wherever it is, if it's a skill set you need to learn, if it's an experience you need to have, if it's connections and network you need to build, leverage your day job to take you in the direction of your other job, your aspiration, as much as you can. And that may not involve like leaving a company or anything like that. It may just involve you finding a new role within that company. It may involve you maybe doing something on the side that brings you that pleasure. Questioning is something that's deeply personal to me. So having gone through the exercise myself, that's what I would recommend.
It's a joy talking to you, Corey, again. And to everybody out
Likewise.
there, as you can see, the world is very, very interesting, and we need to see it from different angles. Sometimes from an SR-71, sometimes from the Blue Angels, sometimes in the trenches working on the next chip or the next thermal problem that you have, or sometimes empowering people. And please come forward. I want to hear from you. I want to hear your stories, not just about how to create new technology in the economy or software eating the whole world, but also how it's impacting us, how it's changing our lives. So that'll be the fun part to hear. Thanks again, Corey. It's a joy always talking to you.
Thank you, Shaker. I appreciate the opportunity.